We're actually going to be talking about Microsoft Azure. If you take a look online, you are going to see a ton of resources that Microsoft's made available for Azure. And it didn't make much sense for us to try to replicate those resources because, well, first of all, I'd have to be a lot smarter than I am. And second of all, there's already plenty of resources. So what we're focusing on is really just kind of a high-level overview to help you decide what it is and also help you decide from an organizational standpoint how it can be used. We have our standard NASCAR slide. Look at all the wonderful companies we partner with, yada, yada, yada. Isn't that wonderful? Yay. Again, the questions that we ask organizations when it's time for them to evaluate who provides IT service, we think we stack up pretty well. And the three pillars of what we do: Simplex-IT, which is primarily a majority of our work where we are the IT department or work with the IT department on an ongoing relationship basis. Simplex-DBA, where we focus on primarily SQL, but corporate data, and making sure that the health, performance, and usefulness of the data is there. And then Simplex-PM, which is on the project management side, where we help make companies better at project management through a combination of mentoring, training, and tools. That primarily focusing on the project, the Microsoft Project Suite, including Project Online and the like. I want to be real clear here. Whenever we do a webinar or luncheonar that talks about Microsoft products or technologies, one of the things that we pride ourselves on, or any product or technology, is it's not a sales pitch. So we try not to make it a look at all the wonderful things that happen, these are great, this will make your life wonderful. So we're going to talk about the good and the bad. And a lot of this stuff, you could talk about any kind of cloud service. So you could, if you're looking at the Amazon equivalent, there's a lot of things that are very, very similar, and there are a lot of things that are somewhat different. But here's one of the key things. Microsoft, over the past 2 years, has been trying to make the transition from a product company to a services company. Why is that? Recurring revenue. If you sell somebody a copy of Windows XP and you sell them a copy of Office 2003, you're not going to get a dime from them again. And in the case of XP in 2003, that basically, until they came out with Vista, which was an earth-shattering success, or Office 2007, which had the ribbon interface, their revenue really got held up on that. So now what they're doing is they are coming up with regular updates. If you take a look at the Office every 3 years, 2007, 2010, 2013, and 2016, which is right now in beta. If you take a look at the desktops, Vista, 7, 8, 8.1, and now 10 on 2 years. Server follows the desktop. Exchange, pretty much every 3 years on that. 7, 10, 13, and 16's in beta. SQL, about every 2 years. Okay? So they're getting much more into that. We want the recurring revenue stream. We want that model to be in place. Well, similarly, the cloud is there, and the cloud gives you the ability, or gives Microsoft the ability, to essentially control what is running underneath everything and to offer it as both product and service. So keep that in the back of your mind when you look at these offerings, that what you're looking at are things that are not going to involve the same capital investment, whether it be hardware or software licensing, but it's going to be an ongoing investment. So less upfront costs, more ongoing. Why is this important? This is important especially for organizations that are used to buying something and never upgrading it. If a company is used to, we bought Server 2008, we paid for it in 2008, and we haven't upgraded in 5 years. They get that capital expenditure spike up front and then nothing, as opposed to a much lower, but it's ongoing. And it's going to be ongoing entirely because you never own it. It's a different mindset. So make sure from a financial standpoint that that's absolutely understood by the gatekeepers in terms of financial, in terms of money. It's a different way. But essentially it's their cloud computing platform. It's a ton of servers up in the cloud. It's not to be confused with Office 365. And when I say that, Office 365 integrates very, very nicely with Azure. it also integrates very nicely with your on-premise Active Directory and other resources. But it's not, it's a different service. Okay? And this is a concept, and we'll go into this when we start looking at the specifics, offers both as server and as service. Now, if you're a non-geek, if you're looking at this from a business standpoint, you need to have the geeks talk to you a little bit about this. But essentially, a service is what a server provides. I have a database server. So it's a server that is running some database software, and then we use the database software. Well, you can do that with Azure. You can essentially rent, buy, purchase, whatever, the server up in the cloud, or you can choose not to and simply buy it as a service. So you never really see the server, you only see the database. And we'll talk about the pluses and minuses of those as we go through. It's not limited to Microsoft technology. Should have put a caveat there. Meaning you can have Linux servers. You can have MySQL databases. You can do these things. However, this will come as a shock. Microsoft put most of their money into the Microsoft technologies. There are limitations. There are pluses and minuses when you look at the other technologies. It's not as fully developed. It's not as fully supported. So if you have truly diverse requirements, you know, you've got Apache servers, you've got MySQL, you've got Oracle data, all that. There's tons of other services out there. You can evaluate them all. Okay? Scales down to small, medium businesses. When we talk about the pricing, you'll get an idea for that. Microsoft is truly trying to create this model so that companies of all sizes can take advantage of it. Does that mean everybody should be using it? No. Just like everything else, it's an option. And one of the challenges that companies are facing today, and it's going to do nothing but get worse, is what we call the solution-rich environment. Right now, when you're talking about any organization, small or medium organization, is looking to take care of some business need, some business requirement, there are a ton of options here. If you looked at the cloud solutions that were available 2 or 3 years ago, really the pricing and the scaling of it was such that only larger organizations could really take advantage of it. Or the technical requirements for maintaining it and managing it were high enough that that added a burdensome cost to it as well. Now it's scaling down so that a smaller company can actually use the services depending upon the business needs, and we'll talk about that. Constantly changing, and we are talking weekly. A week doesn't go by without Microsoft making some announcement for changes to the Azure platform. Almost always, and I'm only saying almost just so because it's going to go on the web, almost always this is an enhancement, it's an addition in service, a lowering in cost, or a new bundling. So it's not something where, oh, we thought this was going to work, now you're taking it away. The exception to this would be, over a longer term, if you attempt to take older technology and push it up to the web. We remember, and next month, Server 2003 goes off in terms of any support. It'll still be there, it'll still be active, it'll still work, but the challenge is Microsoft's not supporting it anymore, and neither are most vendors. Why? It's 12 freaking years old. In IT, that's a ridiculously long period of time, and part of the biggest challenge of 2003 is its lack of security. Lack of security means that no one that is supporting it can say, yes, that's secure. Well, it's hard for Microsoft or any other vendor to offer a good cloud service that would utilize technologies that haven't been updated in 12 years and say that that cloud is secure. So you're going to find those kind of issues I'd be concerned about under any circumstances, but particularly with Azure. So what can we do? Essentially what we're putting in is we're putting in an infrastructure in the cloud that we can make part of our organization, or we can keep as part of theirs and just use the services, or a combination thereof, and we'll get into some examples as we go. So I can just create, like we talked about, virtual machines, which for all purposes are servers. Okay? And I can create Windows and Linux, and we'll look at the options. I can also have remote applications. And this is one, remote apps, kind of what we used to call terminal servers. Terminal server meaning that I have one physical server and people use their devices, connect to it, and that server is actually running the programs and accessing the data, and my laptop, desktop is only seeing the results. So it does all the horsepower. It's a good way to access virtual or remote resources. That is in place. That, however, is one of those where it is changing very dynamically. The idea that a small organization could actually have their server up in the cloud, remote apps running, so they're actually not running anything locally, they're all running it remotely. That's been one of the things that's been very, I'll call it volatile, and really by volatile, they're coming up with their plans and with their offerings and with their configurations over the past 6 months or so. So that's one where if a company is truly looking to move to the cloud, as in they really have no critical IT locally, it's all located up in the cloud, this is going to be critical. And I think for smaller companies, I'm not 100% sure this is there yet, but it's absolutely on their roadmap, and we're talking months, not years. Okay? Applications, web. So I have a website, and actually with Microsoft's offering, you can host your website to a point for free in Azure. To a point meaning the resources necessary for your website are limited and constricted. So they're limited in terms of like your MySQL. What do we say the database had to be? So a 20 meg database is the limit for the free MySQL. That's not a very big database. Okay. Similarly, if the more requirements your website has, you may be talking about additional features that you want. But a relatively simple website you can have hosted for free with Azure. You can also have applications, application services. So one of the things that we look for, especially when we talk about mobile devices, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone, and we were talking about how companies with the BYOD, bring your own devices, how do we protect against a person's personal device not being compromised, but we don't want to take over that device because it's not ours. Well, one of the ways is to forget the device and instead put the application up in the cloud so that the mobile device is used to run the application. The application, however, never touches the mobile device through either, whether your service or application or whatever. And that way, all you have to do is manage the device or the application. So that would be where it's up in the cloud. And we'll talk about connectivity speed as we go on. SQL, data, data, data. And again, this is one where you can have SQL Server, a Windows server that you have SQL installed on and you work with it, or you can have SQL as a service where you essentially have a database and applications connect to it. You can go either way. Storage. I just want to store stuff. However you want to interpret that. Whether it be you're using it for backup, for business continuity, disaster recovery, all that kind of thing. Internet of Things, telemetry receiving. Essentially, those are devices that could be located anywhere on the planet that are gathering data and either just simply passing that data along or doing something based on that data. Well, how do we gather that data, especially if it's not at one location? Something like this. So telemetry receiving would essentially be a service that you would have up in Azure that would be gathering information from these devices no matter where they are on the planet. As opposed to having it at your location, which is great if all of the devices are at your location. But just give you one example, trucking. More and more trucking companies are relying on Internet of Things devices that are giving updated information as to where the trucks are. Okay, this would essentially do that without giving an impact on your organization's internet connectivity. Two of the things that have been relatively recent about the last 2 or 3 months is backups and site recovery. So up until relatively recently, the whole concept of offsite recovery was we use backup utilities, we use backup resources, we then push that up to some kind of cloud, specialized cloud storage. We then use that specialized cloud storage to, if necessary, virtualize the backups. Okay, we use a company called eFolder, which does a very, very nice job of that. Well, what Azure basically is saying now, or what Microsoft is saying through Azure, is let's integrate that into the whole cloud concept in terms of their offerings. So do, in a very different way, essentially the same thing. So that as part of your infrastructure, we're actually making copies of the virtual servers that are at your site, or the servers at your site, and updating them routinely up to the cloud. And in case of failure, we have the option of booting it in the cloud. So, and then single sign-on, and we'll show that as we get to the demonstration. Single sign-on, more and more companies are using more and more cloud services. So you have, your company uses Salesforce.com. Salesforce.com has their own credentials. User, password. Amazon, user, password. So if we have to keep track of that for our employees, now our employees have to keep track of that, and our employees could either accidentally share that information or inadvertently share that information. If instead we take these applications and we associate them with their network, their Active Directory logons, all they have to do is log on once. They log on once, we then have a web portal which lists all of the resources, and they click on any of the portal icons, and I'll show you how we've done it, and it automatically pushes the credentials through, which means that the employees never have to know any of their other credentials, which makes the whole thing about an employee leaving the company a lot easier. One. Or if it's a corporate account and several people have, you don't have to share that information. It doesn't get out quite as often. It's a lot easier to work with. Okay. So here's an application example. So we've got a traditional web application. This white space right here is Azure. Okay? These do not represent physical servers. The whole concept of physical servers is completely moot. It has no impact whatsoever here. You have no idea what physical server these things are on, and you don't care. These are virtual servers or services that have been configured. You've allocated a certain amount, or you've subscribed to a certain amount of resource for it, and you can scale it up or scale it down as need be. And then what you do is you create essentially a subnet, part of the network, so that these machines can talk to each other. So I've got web servers set up, and I've got a database server set up. These guys can talk to them. And then I also have to configure, and Azure refers to it as a gateway. You could also refer to it as a router or the like. How does the rest of the world access it? So I want the rest of the world to be able to access these web servers as if they were on the internet, because they are. I make DNS entries, I do all that kind of fun stuff, and this looks, acts, and behaves web servers out in the public, if that's how I want that to be set up. Okay? So fairly straightforward, and if I had at my home location, my physical office, if I had a Hyper-V server, quite honestly, even a VMware server, I would do the exact same thing. Okay, so there's not a lot of magic here. It's pretty straightforward. So I just create these servers or services, and then I configure as I would, using the same knowledge that I have to create one on-premise. And I manage it and I maintain it the same way I would. Now, we'll get into the costing here, but let's say I'm seasonal. Sometimes, some months of the year I'm a lot busier, or this site's going to be a lot busier. It's simple to migrate from a smaller machine or smaller resources to larger resources. And for all purposes, what happens is you change the subscription from this size machine down to this size machine or vice versa. And when you do that, it has to be rebooted. Otherwise done. So the configuration of the migration switching from resources is fine, and you're billed based on what you configured. So the whole concept of what if we outgrow it becomes a lot easier to deal with. I mean, now if we have deal with physical servers, I have to add more memory. You know, we have to shut it down, crack open the box, add memory, boom, boot it. Okay, well, thankfully, a lot of us have virtual. So, okay, as long as I am not overtaxing the virtual server, I just reallocate the memory and restart the virtual, but I still have to worry about whether or not the physical box has enough resources. Well, with this, you don't. You simply allocate the resource. Microsoft figures out where the box should be placed physically. Okay, let's make it a little more complicated. So in this particular case, what I've got, and you can tell because up at the top left, you see the building, because that means on-premise. And then this is over in Azure, over on the right. So now I'm going to have a domain controller. A domain controller, essentially, that's a server whose role is to maintain the rights, privileges, basically accessibility for the domain, for the organization. And you can have what are called multiple sites. Traditionally, up till now, a multiple site has been a second office, a third office, a fourth office. And what we do is we put a domain controller in each one of those offices, and they communicate with each other so that they all know, and I'm keeping this simple here, so that they all know all of the users and the credentials and the like. Now we're doing the exact same thing, but instead of the office, we're putting this up in the cloud. So now we've got a domain controller up in the cloud as well as a domain controller here. Well, why do we do that? Well, first of all, the single sign-on works very nicely here and yada, yada, yada. But let's add into this kind of situation in this kind of environment, meaning that I can now have additional servers, services, all that kind of thing, and I can use Active Directory security that's already integrated with the rest of my network seamlessly. Okay? So that I don't have to. I can if I want to. I can create a second domain. I can do whatever, if it makes sense from a security standpoint. But here, I have one-stop shopping as far as how I am managing the security for the organization. Here, inside this office, this building, we are hopefully, with some exceptions, we are hopefully transmitting at 1,000 megabits per second. Okay, so we are transmitting at a gigabit internally. And if you have a poorly configured office, such as I have in my office, which people give me nothing but grief on, I have a 100 megabit switch. So, yes, I have a slow office. And I'm slow too, so it works nicely. But still, it's 100 megabits per second, it's 1,000 megabits per second. So the speed here is very, very good. Similarly, here, within Azure, you can actually be faster than that, but you're at least going to be that speed. Okay? This connection between this location and any user of the Azure resources and here is limited to the slowest connection between these guys and these guys. Now, Azure has a lot of good connection to the internet. They're not going to be a bandwidth problem, all right? But if you have, for example, what is considered to be a normal, I'll go to the small, medium business groups, you're probably looking at under 10 megabits per second. So my connection from here to here resource-wise is 10 megabits per second. Within here, it's 100 megabits or even 1,000 megabits. So wow, do I have a better experience here if I'm going after resources. Okay, let's switch it. Let's move over to the person sitting over here at Starbucks. Completely different. The Starbucks connection, depending upon good day, bad day, or whatever, is horrible, but it's going to be horrible wherever they go to. but we want, if someone connects to a network resource here, we want them to be able to have, here's the authenticity, here's the authentication piece. It's the domain controller up in Azure. Similarly, if I have these 3 servers and I'm using Active Directory, I want to have this to be the domain controller there so we can use it for security. If I want to have complete total separation of security between what's here in Azure and here, there's a couple ways I can do it. The simplest way, and the way we used to do it back in the old NT days or even 2000 days, 2 totally separate domains. And then just have some trust relationships between them. Now, I would say that security has gotten reasonable enough that that's not always the go-to solution. You may just, whether it be a subdomain or a domain where you're making the organization, I mean, there's ways to get around it, there's ways to do it. So the problem or the challenge is there's a lot of ways you can do it, and every one of them gives a little bit of goods and a little bit of bads, and you kind of just need to decide. Make sense?
Yeah.
So now what I've got are different sets. So you'll notice I can organize these resources for various reasons and purposes. In this case, I've got a front end, and then I've got back ends, and you'll notice I've got doubles. So I've got failover. Okay, and there's different ways to do this with Azure, just like there's different ways to do it on-premise. So I've got the web front end, and I'm going to make this a different subnet, what we used to call the DMZ. So I'm going to make this available to the public, and then this web end, this web app, is then going to connect to the actual app servers. They're going to be on the back end. So there's very limited external access to these guys. And then I've got SQL in a cluster, and then I've got the domain controllers for security. Okay? So by putting this together, and one of the key things, I can do this on-premise too. And this is actually one of the nice things about this is the same skill sets from an IT professional standpoint that make you a good on-premise IT person. It's all transferable up to here. There are certain things you don't have to be as concerned about, and there are certain things you now have to be concerned about. But 80% of the skill sets transfers. Okay? And that's one of the nice things. And historically, the poster child I would use on it would be Hyper-V versus Vmware. Is when you start to work with Vmware, it's a great product, it works very nicely, you have to learn the Vmware of doing things, drivers, configurations, all that kind of thing. With Hyper-V, if you already know how to manage a Windows server, you know the look and feel, you know the approximate process of how Hyper-V works from an administrative standpoint. The same thing's true here. If you've got a good feel for Microsoft technologies and configuring and managing Microsoft technologies, you're going to get most of this. Okay? The biggest challenge is going to be where do I start and how do I keep from getting out of control? Which, the first time you're thrown into the deep end as far as networks and servers, we all face that same problem anyway. We can also do this. And keep in mind, this doesn't have to be an all or nothing either or, just like any other connection between buildings within an organization. So I can have my on-premise location which connects through a VPN to these resources. This can be duplicated. We have several buildings within our organization. This can also be duplicated. We have our organization and we also have our customers and vendors. We have our organization, we have our customers, we have our vendors, and we have people who just come, anonymous connectivity, because this is where we do some line of business work. Just like we have on-premise. But I don't have to worry now about Time Warner's reliability. I don't have to worry now about my on-premise availability when it comes to these resources being used outside of your organization. And remember, we talked about this speed issue, if this is a resource that's being used by a high percentage of people outside of your organization, if you take this resource and put it on premise, then everybody who uses this resource is going to consume your on-premise internet. And they're also going to have a certain level of access to your on-premise internet. It makes this location a lot more complicated. Whereas if you keep it here, it truly is, this is only for this application, for this resource. So when you have companies that are concerned with having corporate data center, we've got 6 locations, they're all about the same. Which one's going to be our corporate data center? Who gets that fun-filled job? Corporate data center means we're going to have a lot more web traffic, a lot more reliability. If you have an issue or a problem with either connectivity or access, it's not only your location that's going to fail, it's all the other locations going to fail. Go with something like this, which means that you don't have a data, or you do have a data center, it's up here. So this is an example of my single sign-on. So what I've done, or what I have done nothing, because I didn't set this up. So what Steve and Kevin did was they set up all of these applications to automatically have the credentials added for me to use. So I don't necessarily need to know the credentials. All I have to do is click on this and boom. It's going to open up that site with the credentials that's associated with this service. And there's about 100, 150 different services that work with this. There's thousands. There's 100, 150 times a lot that work. And more companies are making this more accessible.
And they're also making a like a custom one where the single sign-on wizard will read a page you feed it and try and find the username, password, and try to find all the fields that can be filled in. So you can, if the site doesn't already exist, you can put in custom ones. And I've done that for a couple of these.
Yeah, so the nice thing on this is that this gives you, from an IT standpoint, a good way to control the access to these applications and also make it a lot easier for adding new employees or employees leaving the organization. It's a lot easier to deal with.
So do you have a password to get in there just for your own self?
My network account.
Okay, and then that's it, and then everything else is already set up
Right.
Because the IT person put all the passwords to get to those sites, those individual sites, and those are your individual sites.
Right.
It's not somebody else's.
So poor Freddie here, he was the guinea pig for the bulk of how this, testing it out, working with it. When Freddie started,
And Freddie is fully recovered. Okay. Rounding up.
With Freddie, we gave him his logon to the network, and that was it.
Okay.
I configured his My Apps page and set passwords for the different services and things that we use. And his password for all of those was a 20 or 24 digit random.org password. So it's impossible to even guess it. There is no documentation. I fed that password into the service, I fed that password into the single sign-on, and then Freddie could still log on and work with all the different tools. He never knew his password though.
Gotcha.
He only ever had the first network one.
So if he's out. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, so if he's outside of your network, or he just wants to doing something on the weekend, logs on from his personal account, wants to go to Amazon. Does he just basically still need to know that one password and he can go directly there, or does he have to log on through?
That's exactly what's happening here. Okay. Our network is back up on 91 at our office. I'm logged on using my domain credentials to log on to this, which that gets the cache credentials. But then if I go to the myapps.microsoft.com, and by the way, I don't have to be on this machine, so I can go to any computer. I go to any computer and use this. Now I'll have to know my network password to log on. So if I got on somebody else's laptop, I go to myapps.microsoft.com.
Okay.
I log on Bob at simplex-it.com, and my password is
24-digit password.
Right.
Remember that?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. I log on, it's then going to read from this domain controller that's up in Azure, the configuration. It's going to pull in the information. It's going to create then that page you just saw with here are all the applications that are available to me. You know, if I don't have an account set up for it, it's not showing up there.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then boom, I can go to it. But this is where we need the domain controller up in the cloud, and we need the configuration, the single sign-on configuration. Yeah.
So I have a question. If we hired somebody that came from another organization or had their own personal Amazon account they wanted to bring into this, would we recommend not to integrate or federate their applications they've already subscribed to in with this and only leave it as corporate? Because if they were to be termed, we kill the access account, we cut them off from.
That's actually that's a really annoying question, because there's not a good answer. Okay, but you hit a really good question, and that is that, to repeat, if you started an employee that had their own accounts already, would you add these to the single sign-on and then have to take them off afterwards? The problem is not a technical one. The problem is an organizational one. Part of it is that if I'm the employee and I get hired by you guys, settle down, it's a hypothetical, okay? But if I went on with you guys, do I want to give you my passwords for those things? Because if I share those passwords with you, which you need in order to set those up, okay, now there's a bit of a, purely speaking, there's a bit of an issue there. Also now, you're going to have to keep track of, for each employee, who had access, or who has unique or special accounts for which things. Because you may have, you don't necessarily want to duplicate or replicate that. We have one Amazon account for Simplex-IT. All right, so whoever has access to it, you're using the Simplex-IT account. Now, I don't want to turn, but that's Amazon. If you look at PayPal, everybody puts in their own.
Yeah.
I need to keep track of the differences there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Since all these corporations are making us work harder just to do business with them, how does it work when each of those companies say, oh, your 30 days are up, you need to create a new password, and before you create the new password, you have to tell us what these different characters are?
Yeah, you're screwed. No, and that's actually, there's a good point on that, and to extend to that, so you have the collision of securities, of secure strategies. So company A, we're going to secure the account by putting into a single sign-on database for the individual users. Company B, who's one of the accounts that company A connects to, has unique qualifiers when you try to get onto a different when you try to get on from a different computer, when all that kind of thing. And there's absolutely going to be some collisions there, depending upon the companies. And that's going to happen. In addition to that, there are several companies that are offering their own single sign-on technologies. If you take a look, for example, AVG, who we're a partner with for our network monitoring, they've come out with their own single sign-on technologies. So you can have people who are using the Azure, people who are using the AVG, or more of a security level. Yeah, there definitely are going to be issues on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, remember there's thousands of applications that are in there. Those are ones where there's more or less an agreement between XYZ company and Microsoft, where they provide something that takes care of the authentication. So you're not going to have your stupid little CAPTCHA thing in the middle ever. They already trust each other enough to say, hey, here's some credentials. Let's keep going forward with that. We don't have to raise that extra level of security. Now,
So like the company, like with your organization, every time, and I don't personally use Amazon, but like hypothetically, say Amazon requires you change it once per 30 days. Like Microsoft has an agreement with them where you don't have to change you don't have to change every employee's information. It stays the password stays the same.
I wouldn't say that for all organizations, but my suspicion is that yes, some of them do have that agreement. So it's kind of like we, again, company A, company B. Company B recognizes that company A's technology provides enough security, so us doing these Amish requirements isn't quite as necessary. So now, can I say that's 100%? Absolutely not. And what Kevin was talking about, how you can kind of roll your own, absolutely not. But in some cases, but this is, I don't want to say these are uncharted waters, because they're certainly not. It's been 5-6 years since the businesses started getting serious about this stuff. But the problem is like I said earlier, you're in a solution-rich environment, and sometimes the solution that company A provides as the host of the services, and the company B provides, who is the consumer of those services, but for an entire company, they don't always gel. And that's one of the things, you got to test it. You got to test it and you got to try it. And also Google, Bling it, so you can see whether or not other people have other experiences with it. But this is one where don't trust an experience that's over a year old, because everything changes ridiculously quickly. So, make sense? So, let's take a look at the portal. And the resolution's kind of high. This is actually the new preview, beta, whatever you want to call it, portal for Azure, but it's pretty much the primary one everybody's using-ish. So you'll notice it's got that, it kind of looks like the Windows 8, Windows 10 interface. So if you're looking for something that's a Windows 2008 interface, nope. But it is a GUI. It's not a PowerShell. But PowerShell is a big part of Microsoft, and as you'd expect, there's a ton of things you can do in Azure with PowerShell. Okay. So we've got notifications, we've got browsing, take a look at the active stuff, billing, support. There's a tour here, feedback. You can take a look at the service help. You'll notice the green check marks around the maps of the world. Those are the actual data centers. You can request your specific servers and the like to be located at particular data centers. All that kind of thing.
That home page is configurable as well. Bob doesn't have any, but you can pin, say you have a couple servers that you want to you access frequently. You can pin them to this first page, so that way you don't have to drive through and browse through all the different tiers and just click on it. Oh, look, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Cool.
Is it possible to put our company logo or like a splash page up there?
I doubt you're going to have people looking at this too much that would be moved by that. I don't know if it's possible. Yeah. Yeah, this is something that my suspicion is it's going to be you guys, who are going to be the ones that are going to want to look at it and all that kind of fun silliness. So this gives an idea of all, and you have, and by the way, this is a subscription. You remember we talked about in the beginning, you pay this on a monthly basis. And it's not a fixed fee, it's going to be dependent on usage, and we're going to talk about that. So you can have multiple subscriptions. Why would you want multiple subscriptions? Because cost center. You may have one group that is dealing specifically with customer relations. You may have another group that is dealing specifically with vendor relations. Well, they're not the same cost center. So make them two different subscriptions within your organization. But that way the billing is split. Okay.
So yeah, this is our Azure tenant. We have our domain controllers up here. We have a small Linux system for just DNS queries. The remote support tool that we were originally using, LogMeIn Rescue. That just didn't work out. So we started looking at a product called Screen Connect. Rather than spinning up the Screen Connect resources in our office and having to worry about people connecting to our office and all the other stuff, we chose to actually just spin it up in Azure. It took me 10 minutes to start the server up in Azure, install the application, and now anyone who connects to Simplex-IT.com gets redirected to this server, and then we just pay our whatever a month for it. And if there's more usage on it, it costs a little bit more. Sits idle, costs a little bit less. The other thing that we did was we were having some issues. Our antivirus is actually hosted out of our office, and we've got a fair amount of people using that, and it was actually impacting our office, especially on big update days. Somewhere in this list is...
It really hosts our Netflix.
It
really did.
YouTube, no more 1080p, and we have to
Yeah.
watch 720p video. I don't know.
Not on my watch.
So we, again, created another virtual machine up in Azure. I moved the data to over there and told clients, hey, go download everything from Azure. So I offloaded a large amount of pain from our office and put it up in Azure, which can handle that. So it's actually really easy. Again, that was another 10, 15 minutes, server's up and running. I get my applications running on it, and away it goes.
So as far as like the gateway stuff,
The gateway, there's a small one here. There's a networking option. I can ping, manage, do anything to these servers from our office. Likewise, if I'm on those systems, I can access office resources all through the same network. There's a very short list of appliances that are actually approved for that kind of communication. There are ways of putting it together yourself, though. And there's other ones where, yes, it'll work, but we don't support you type thing. And it's actually a really, really small cost to do that. The bulk of it really is just your bandwidth, or the fact that it's on and then some bandwidth after that. So it doesn't take that much, but again, it's seamless integration between Azure and your on-premise or wherever your stuff is.
so one of the things you need to do is, as you get started, you do need to create some kind of connection rules of what you want to have connecting to these resources and not. Jim's asking, wow, looks great. How much does it cost per month? For you, Jim, have we got a deal? Actually, and we actually will talk about some of the specific costing in a minute. I know, we're all excited. He just said woohoo. So I wonder if someone types woohoo, should there automatically, they have to say it out loud? I think there should be a rule. So in any case, what we're going to do is let's create a server. Strangely enough, I just create on new. And Kevin is like going, oh God, Bob, don't blow it, don't blow it. So, and you'll notice we have compute, web apps, mobile apps, all sorts of options here. There's all sorts of things that we can select. And now, and this is going to get a little bit technical on the licensing standpoint, and understand the bottom line is talk to somebody who understands the licensing if this is an issue. One of the things that happens here is that these are Hyper-V boxes, which means that at the end of the day, there's a couple of files representing the server and the disks. And if you want to, you can take that server and copy it, migrate it, download it to your on-premise location, and you've got the server there. The challenge is that while you're running it in in Azure, you're paying for the licensing as part of the subscription. If you download it, you are now buying that license when you run it locally. Okay? The reason that matters is because when I just say I want a new computer for Christmas, if you just want a Windows Server, it comes up with Windows Server Data Center, which is not cheap. Why does it do that? Because that's the licensing that makes the most sense in Azure. And if you want to know why, we can have the conversation, no problem. But Data Center allows you to run unlimited virtual servers, and they all run Data Center by default. Okay? So if you create a server like this, and you make it using Data Center, and then you decide to download it, you're buying a copy of Windows Server Data Center. As opposed to create it locally, upload it, now you've got a Windows standard. So just be aware of that. But we'll go ahead. So I'm going to specify, and right out of the gate, we just have some very simple questions. What are we going to call it? I'm going to call it Lynchinar. Close enough. We're not going to go all the way through. Pricing tier. So if you remember, I basically was talking about how you can select the approximate size of the server that you want this on. And this will load the recommended. For every one of these services, when you go through the new, it'll load what the defaults are, or what the most common options are. So in this particular case, there's a D1 standard, an A1 standard, and a D52 standard, a DS2, I can't even read that. Gives you an idea of the cores, how much gig of memory there is, IOPS, all that good fun stuff, and an approximate, and we'll talk about why it's approximate, here's the monthly cost to operate this. Okay, based on some assumptions. And at any point in time, I can choose because my needs have changed. I need more power. I built it under a D1 standard, now I need a bigger one. I can change the tier and schedule it. It'll essentially shut down the server, boot it back up with the new resources. Boom, good to go. So it's a simple reboot to change this. If I want to see all my options, if I view all, I can go up to 8 cores, 112 gig, $2,000. That includes the software licensing. All the way down to a quarter of a core, 3/4 gig of RAM, a data disk, so significantly smaller. Okay. And you know it's $13. Here's one of the things, and I hate to say this, I really do. Windows Server 2016, by default, is going to come with no GUI. It's all going to be PowerShell. The reason being is because if you keep the GUI out of it, you have significantly decreased the resources necessary for the server, and you've also decreased by, I think, 40% the amount of updates and patching. So when you look at that, you can actually really cut down on the amount of horsepower that you need for servers by staying with the core. Did I say that nicely? I hate PowerShell because I'm old. But you can see how many options are, and this is just for the server. I can go into options. Set different availability sets. You need to talk about that briefly, or?
So you have these availability sets. You can choose where you have your server sitting. You can have it where it's not redundant at all, like it just sits in one. You choose US East. That's where the server is, end of story. You can tell it to do within a zone. There's actually 2 US Easts, so US East 1 and 2. You can tell it to replicate between those 2, and you can tell it to replicate to somewhere else. So like US West. You can have everything over in US East and everything over in US West. You lose half of the US, you still have your data, as long as it wasn't cut in half along.
And you'll notice that you create the sets on an as-needed basis. So you can create the sets because this application, this set of server or services, we have that requirement. We need that high availability. So, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but the idea is that you go through and you simply select. And then it's going to build the server. And it takes about 5 or 10 minutes. The server will then be up and available, and you log on to it and you deal with it like you would any server. Okay. By the way, one of the options up under the compute, the server, is a Windows Server with SQL 2014. Okay, but it's the enterprise version and it's the data center version, so it's going to be the price is going to be there. Okay. Here, I can go in and use a SQL database. This is where I just need the database. I'm going to still have access as far as the security, all that kind of thing, but I'm just running a single database. I don't need the whole server. I don't need access to the whole SQL configuration. I'm okay with that. I just need the database. And especially when you look at web apps and the like, in a lot of cases, that's all we need. So we're not going to pay for all of the pieces parts that go into that. We're also not going to pay for all the overhead, all the additional resources that we would require, and we're not going to have access to all those things. So I'm not going to have as granular access as I would if I had the SQL Server there itself. Okay? But that's okay. And the nice thing is that we can change. We can move things around. When we talk about costing, here's the thing. When you create, and we're just going to talk about server, the rest of them follow this in a similar way. The server, when it's off, is kind of free. There's almost no cost for it, because all it's taking is a little bit of storage space and it's not huge. When the server is on and it's idle, it costs some, but it's not huge. It's when it does something. Why? Because it's the CPU and it's the network traffic. So there's cost for processing. The more that server does from a CPU standpoint, it's going to allocate costs. And when you take a look at the systems, you'll see, it'll give you an idea what the costs are. Similarly, the more you store. And this is especially true when you're talking about storage servers. Okay? And then there's cost for network flow. What I mean by this is as data goes out of those servers, there's cost. Data being uploaded, there is not. But data going out, there is cost. How much? You really have to have some ideas of what your actual consumptions are going to be. You got a couple. You talking about a couple examples, or there really isn't. The estimates that they give is for what they consider to be average cost for that size server, average consumption or the like. So there's actually a pricing calculator, this website here, which will actually walk you through these questions. The problem is you have to kind of know some kind of answer. So and even if you're an IT person, and Kevin and I were talking about this morning, even if you're an IT person, you look at the CPU utilization charts and you know that you're queued up. You know that it's over allocated, but you don't know necessarily what it's going to cost because you don't look at it that way. You look at it, hey, it's 50%, we're okay. It's 20%, we're okay. Same thing for network flow. Network flow is sufficient, it's going, we're okay. You have to look at it from an actual, every time this does anything, there's a cost to it. The nice thing though, you can try it. So, and you can either, you basically purchase it in credits, and the credits are then translated to dollars, and you can buy the credits directly from Microsoft, or better yet, you can buy them through us, which is a much better thing to do because we're cool. And if you're interested in talking more about how this will work for you or your organization, contact us. Zoe just left the room, so. And we'd be happy to set up a conversation with either Steve, Kevin, or God help you, me, or we can talk about how this works for you, good, bad, or indifferent. It is very easy to get a trial set up so you can try it, but you need to understand what you're trying. I mean, it's easy to put a server up there and go, okay, it worked. Well, what's the cost going to be? What's the benefit going to be? How well does it work in terms of both your on-premise integration requirements as well as your customer integration requirements? So from the business aspect, there's that. And there's a lot of promotions. I will say there are a lot of promotions that expire at the end of this month. If you buy a Windows Server license or a Microsoft license, Server SQL or the like, I think you get a free $100 credit with Azure. It's not hard to get a free $100 credit with Azure when you're just getting started. So, but we'd love to talk to you about that, blah, blah, blah. Thank you all very much. Appreciate you coming and sticking with us on the log on and yada, yada, yada. Yay.